Hello, everyone. Jeremy Hohola here with 9 News. Governor Polis is speaking now at the podium to give us an update about the state's response to COVID-19. He also is talking about the protests that have erupted around Denver over the last few days. Let's listen in.
But of course, I would also be remiss if I didn't address the difficult times that are overtaking cities across our country. Here in Denver, the hurt and anguish that so many of us feel this past week. What happened to George Floyd was not only wrong, it was brutal, it was inhumane, and it was murder. You know, like most Americans, I saw the snippets of the video. I made a point of going back and watching the entire video, and I should say videos, but I watched a compilation of all the videos. I think it's 20-some minutes of footage, but in particular, the video of the time period, 9 minutes, where the perpetrator effectively murdered George Floyd with a knee on the neck. And I'm glad, like nearly all Americans, that the officer has been brought up on murder charges. Of course, we still await formal charges against those who were complicit in the murder of George Floyd. You know, it was remarkable to watch the entire footage where George Floyd said a number of times, "I can't breathe," later even passed out. And the good, honest people that were bystanders tried their best to intervene, saying, you know, don't kill him, and take your knee off and check his pulse. Somebody who was a bystander even said that he had been to academy and he knew that this wasn't consistent with the way we train our men and women in blue. Justice will be served, and no one in our nation is above the rule of law. But I think the reason that this really has this universal focus is, while it is about George Floyd and holding his murderers accountable, I think we all know in our heart of hearts, we all know in our minds that this is not an isolated incident. The reality is much larger. This is a pattern. We see it starkly, we see it visually with the murder of George Floyd, but we all know in our heart of hearts that there are countless times that this has occurred without the video footage, without the conclusive evidence, and it's something that many Americans of color live in fear of for their children and for themselves. It's about a pattern of injustice. It's about unfair treatment that Black Americans and communities of color have endured, not just limited to our criminal justice system, but in many areas of American life that we take for granted. And holding George Floyd's killer fully accountable under law won't bring peace to the Black mother that worries every time her son gets behind a wheel, or the Black man who's treated like he's not good enough, or the Black grandmother that sees her grandchildren being treated with some of the same inequality that she's been fighting against for decades and thought that our nation had made greater progress on. We need to listen to the voices of those who are crying out for reform. We need to take action. And to those who are peacefully protesting, I want you to know that I see you, I hear you, and I grieve with you. And more importantly, I want to work with you to make Colorado better and America better, and a Colorado for all, and America for all. We need to keep the focus on the task at hand, and it's unfortunate that the destruction of property that has been committed by those who have turned to violence have distracted from the righteous message, the pure message of justice and equality and reform. It's heartbreaking to see small businesses already struggling from COVID-19 to have to spend savings to fix damage in their establishments. But fortunately, spray paint can be power washed, and I commend those who peacefully joined in the protest and helped clean up the morning after, whether it's cleaning up garbage in the street or spending their time wiping out graffiti. But you know what? That property can be cleaned, but the Black lives that are taken cannot be replaced or brought back. And the pain and injustice and fear that many Coloradans of color fear takes a long time to repair and overcome. And it's also divisive and sad to hear some call for a more violent crackdown against peaceful demonstrators exercising their First Amendment rights in our Constitution. Some even advocating militarized action against our own people. This is not China. This is not Tiananmen Square. And that's not leadership. That's just creating even more of the very division that we need to prevent and heal from and bridge. To create real systemic change, we all need to come together. This isn't a conservative or liberal thing. It's not a black or white thing. It's not a geographic thing. This responsibility belongs to every one of us. White, black, brown, local, state, national leaders, our law enforcement community, neighbors, many of us who've shared with me how angry they are by the illegal actions taken by those Minneapolis officers and those who stood by, not only because it was an unjust killing, because it also tarnishes our honest and hardworking police officers and gives them a bad name among those who they work every day and put their lives on the line to protect. I heard from a state patrol officer who told me he shared the sentiments of the protesters and said that the vast majority of those making their voices heard were doing so in a peaceful manner, but had also been hit with rocks, fireworks, or even exploded by his head. I was glad to see the Denver police chief yesterday join arm in arm with those who exercised their free speech to protest the unjust murder of George Floyd and the others, some with names, some without, that we all know in our heart of hearts have plagued our nation and our state for far too long. We can't allow the bad actions of a few to overshadow the overwhelming and undeniable message that more action is needed to ensure that every American, including black Americans, can go to watch birds in the park, or go for a run, or interact with our criminal justice system without fearing for their lives. In our nation, a nation that prides ourselves on equality under the law. And I'm ready, willing, and eager to be your partner in that work. One of my greatest fears in watching the events over the last weekend is that so many people gathering in one place together will increase the spread of coronavirus across our nation, here in Colorado. Only in the coming weeks will we see the full impact of these large gatherings, but health experts tell me it could result in hundreds of new cases and untold pain, death, and suffering, just as we were making progress. At least I was glad to see many protesters, hopefully most, wearing masks to protect themselves and those around them from coronavirus. And I want to thank Representative Coleman, Representative Herod, RTD Board Member Chantel Lewis, and Denver School Board Member Tay Anderson for helping distribute thousands of masks to the crowd and also for their leadership. And I urge anyone who's demonstrating to do their very best to keep their distance between themselves and others and to wear a mask or face covering. We want to make sure that people are as safe as possible. Congregating outside is certainly safer than congregating inside, but with so many people in one area, and statistically, it's a certainty that some of them were asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic carriers of coronavirus. There's no doubt that those who congregated faced an increased risk of infection. Now, many protesters were in their teens, their 20s, perhaps their 30s, at lower risk of hospitalization. But our society interacts across age groups. Many of them might be going home to a grandparent or parent. Others might have had pre-existing health conditions. Like so many things in our world, we're doing things differently to be safe. And exercising our First Amendment rights of speech, of gathering, is a constitutionally protected right. And we want to make sure that everybody doing it is as safe as possible. And that those who are at higher risk hopefully don't put themselves in harm's way, even and find other effective ways to voice their passionate beliefs. I also want to strongly encourage everyone who attended the protest last weekend to get tested. The state has partnered with municipal governments, and we provide free, quick, easy testing at the Pepsi Center. Here's what folks should do. You should get tested anytime you develop symptoms, of course. But if you have not developed symptoms, about 7 days after you marched in a protest, you should go in for a free, quick, easy test at the Pepsi Center. That's the way that we can act to capture earlier some of the folks that might be contagious without knowing it or mildly symptomatic, to prevent this from being a major setback for our state with regard to coronavirus. So Denver and Mayor Hancock have announced they've expanded the criteria at Pepsi Center to allow anybody who attended the protest to get testing. Anybody, whether you attended the protest or not, if you have symptoms, you should get tested immediately. But for folks who attended the peaceful protests, strongly recommend that you consider taking advantage of this opportunity to get tested about 7 days after you attended those protests. You know, we need to remember that we're dealing with a global pandemic. And we should all be wearing masks whenever we're interacting with others outside of our household, and take the proper precautions in every situation to try to be 6 feet from others. And while it was encouraging to see so many of the protesters do that, as governor, it certainly kept me up at night worrying about thousands or tens of thousands of people congregating, and the health risk to our state for this justified cause. And I think all the protesters knew and entered into and knew the risk that they were taking, and believed passionately in that cause, the cause that we all share of racial justice and of harmony. In terms of where we are with coronavirus in Colorado, 26,783 cases. We have 1,473 deaths of people with COVID and 1,228 deaths of people directly attributable to COVID. 7 of the last 14 days have a downward trend in the moving average, meaning that leveled off, not decreasing anymore, also not increasing. And of course, we're concerned that Coloradans need to keep up the mask wearing and the social distancing so that we can stabilize the situation and avoid overrunning our hospitals in another wave. In terms of hospitalizations, 12 of the last 14 days have a downward trend in the 7-day moving average. We have space. We are now, of course, making sure that we go about something close to our lives, our normal lives, in a way that isn't necessarily normal, meaning going to restaurants if you feel like taking on that additional risk, but often sitting outside or at spaced off tables. All of these activities are available now, but we're doing them in better, safer ways that we're taking precautions that we didn't need to without coronavirus, and now we are. And as I've been saying for months, we're in this for the long haul. We need to live the safe, sustainable way to live with COVID-19 in our lives without having another spike that would overrun our hospital system and lead to unnecessary loss of life for those who could be saved, both with COVID and with other health conditions. And remember, we need to keep space in our hospitals for people who have heart attacks, for people who have strokes, for people who have appendicitis. It's not just about COVID. So if COVID were to fill up all the beds, people would die of other treatable conditions that are not COVID related. So that is the imperative. And it really depends on your behavior, on our behavior. The better job we do, social distancing, cutting back on being with others outside of our household, being safer in the great, vast outdoors, the more that we do that, the better, quicker we will get through this, the more robust the economic recovery will be, and the more lives we will save. The lowest risk thing that anybody can do is, of course, stay home. It's also lower risk to engage in outdoor activities in the vast, great outdoors. And that's why we moved from safer at home to safer at home and in the vast, great outdoors. And by vast, great outdoors, I hope we're conveying that it's not safe to be clustered together in a small outdoor area. Might be better than being indoors, but that doesn't mean it's safe. But vast, great outdoors, county open space, federal lands, large areas, right? If your municipal park is crowded, go to a larger county open space. The less crowded it is, the more vast, and Colorado is blessed with millions of acres of accessible land, state, local, federal, And it is relatively safe to be away from others in the great outdoors in our beautiful June weather. It's healthy for mind, body, and spirit, and it's a lot safer than being around others in a confined area. Outdoor gatherings, a little more risky together, and of course the highest risk is indoor gatherings with recirculating air. And we're going back to limited outdoor gatherings. In fact, groups of 10 or less are free to do what they want outdoors together. And youth sports leagues and adult sports leagues can also be resuming, and that's in groups up to 25. Now, you might ask, why is that different than a non-organized group of 25? It's not necessarily different from a risk perspective, but when you have a formal league and they're playing, it's better from a contact tracing perspective. When somebody contracts coronavirus in a league, and unfortunately, I'm using the word when, not if, because it is a near certainty that with all of the youth and adult sports across our state that there will be incidences of coronavirus among league participants. When someone contracts coronavirus, it's relatively easy through a organized sport to then contact teammates as well as opposing teams that might have encountered that person during their period where they were contagious, so that they too can be tested and isolated if necessary. That's not possible when you have a free-for-all of different random social groups that aren't part of formal leagues that are in groups of 25 or 20. So there's a reason. And you know, some leagues have been canceled for the summer. Others are moving forward. And I think participants in these organized sports just need to ask themselves what level of risk they're willing to take. They should take into account if they do live with a older parent or grandparent, if they themselves might be at increased risk. It's a moderate risk. It's a decision for Coloradans to make if you want to participate in youth sports or adult sports that are organized. There will be cases of coronavirus, and that can lead to, of course, temporary interruptions in the schedule of the sports, but that's the least of the concerns. It can also lead to hospitalizations and potentially even death of people that are young and healthy and participate in sports. While the death rate is much lower for people that are young and healthy, there are still tragically some fatalities across every age range. So that's something to think about. Groups of 10 or less outdoors allowed doesn't mean you should immediately go out and be in a group of 10. It's safer to be by yourself or with those in your household, right? If you live in a household of 4, as me, my partner Marlon, and our 2 kids, we go hiking together. We don't seek out a group of 10. We don't look for a group of 10. We don't look for to do it with our friends, but you can do it up to a group of 10. That's a level of risk that you can choose to take on if you'd like to. And then through the organized youth sports and the organized adult sports, they can have a slightly larger group, slightly higher risk, but lower societal risk, because we can do the tracking and the tracing very easy for people who are formal participants in a sport. Playgrounds and swimming pools open for June. Kids should be outside. Again, different municipalities are making different decisions. Limited capacity, 10 people or less on the playground. Will my daughter and son, be on the playground? Maybe a little bit during June, if it's a sunny day, if it looks like there's not a lot of other kids on the playground. We might, like every parent, our kids want to get outside, and they love the hikes, but they also love the playgrounds, especially our daughter. Short-term rentals are back. A lot of our communities that rely on tourism to drive their economy are dipping their toe in the water. Hotels and some recreation, limited dining. They're concerned, as we all are, for our own health, and that means our own health from a physical perspective and our own health from an economic perspective. And like all Coloradans, our tourism communities are balancing those. And it's also important that we respect the desires of our communities, some of which are more open to having tourism sooner, and others which are putting a premium on protecting the lives and preventing spread of coronavirus in their areas. And it's important that we honor those local rules around and be good neighbors as Coloradans who like to recreate across our state. We've also released the draft guidance on reopening the houses of worship in our state. They've been open at capacity of 10 or less. Thankfully, at a time we need them most, they can now go up to 50 in their main worship hall. And just as they have throughout this crisis, if they have other rooms, they can have 10 or less people per room. These are all these are all currently draft guidelines that are out there. It's very important to me that we have some process for public participation informing these, and so there's a period of public comments like we had for restaurants that ends, I believe, Wednesday or Thursday. Wednesday, I believe, tomorrow. The rules go live on Thursday, and all of this happens, meaning pools can be open for the weekend with the limited capacity, playgrounds can be open. But check with your local jurisdiction. There's many in the state that reasonably so are keeping their playgrounds closed a little longer or want to set up the protocols around cleaning. Just as, you know, not every restaurant in our state is open, and some might not plan to open for a week or two, not every pool, not every park is necessarily going to open right away, but they can. It's a good outlet for folks to be out safer in our great, vast outdoors. And we should avail ourselves of our wonderful June weather to have a reduced risk environment by being in areas that have free airflow rather than recirculating air inside, which leads to higher contagion rates. And we have some pictures here of some of the wonderful things that people can do in Colorado, whether it's mountain biking or fishing or hiking. We have an incredible state, a beautiful state, and as long as we're in small groups and apart from others, that is a safer thing to do than indoor recreation, where you might be around a lot of other people. During all these activities, remember that when you're in public, when you're around others, wear a mask. That's very important. So, you know, when you're in the great vast outdoors, you don't need to wear a mask the entire time. But if there's somebody coming down the trail and you're going to pass them, hopefully stepping aside 6 feet, that's when you wear the mask. But when you're around others, wear a mask. Be smart. Be effective. We can do this. It's really part of the 4 pillars of success for Colorado, and that's staying at home whenever possible. And by the way, I respect the fact that many Coloradans who joined the protest concluded it is not possible to stay at home. It is not possible to remain silent in the face of the killing of George Floyd, in the face of ongoing racial discrimination. And I completely respect the fact that those Coloradans consider that essential, and they would consider it unconscionable to remain at home. So staying safer at home when possible. And we wouldn't ask anybody to stay at home when it's not possible and when your conscience doesn't allow you to stay home. Older Coloradans and those with underlying health conditions should stay at home whenever they can and enjoy the vast, great outdoors away from others. Wear a mask in public. In our successful work scaling up testing, and now some new information about our work to scale up tracing. And I have an exciting announcement about the tracing in a moment. First, on the testing, we're now in the 7,000 to 8,000 tests per day range. That's really a proud testament to our team getting their hands on, of course, more supplies, public and private, state and local public health agencies standing up testing sites. I think we're over 46 now, free community testing sites across the state. The main thing I want to convey, and you can look at a testing site near you at covid19.colorado.gov. The main points that people should know: free, quick, and easy. You can't beat that. Free, quick, and easy. 15, 20 minutes. Quick. It's not even the one you saw me do the other day where the swab goes way back. The one at the Pepsi Center, it depends on which site you're at, but the Pepsi Center is an example. It's self-administered. They hang you something like a Q-tip, you rub it around at the entryway to your nose and you hand it back. Some are saliva. Very easy. Quick, easy, free. If you have symptoms anywhere in our state, please get tested. And then for other folks, there's limited testing for asymptomatic if you're a frontline worker that might have encountered it, if you've been exposed to it, and of course, if you've been a protester, please get tested 7 days after your potential exposure, or quicker if you develop symptoms. So we also know that, as I've indicated from the very start, testing is only a piece of the puzzle. It's only as good as what you do with that testing result. That's the tracing and the contacts and the isolation. The impact of testing and tracing, which will be incorporated into future models by Dr. Samet, it really determines on how it's followed up by the epidemiological work and contact tracing. And last month, we announced a doubling of our epidemiology team. Today, I'm absolutely ecstatic to announce that the Corporation for National and Community Service will mobilize more than 800 AmeriCorps and Senior Corps members to support the state of Colorado's COVID-19 response through contact tracing and other associated work. And contact tracing means following up with individuals who came into contact with an infected individual to notify them that they've been exposed, ensure they get tested, and quarantine themselves if necessary. 300 AmeriCorps members based out of the Southwest Region campus in Aurora are starting immediately. 350 Vista Summer Associates will be hosted by the Community Resource Center in Denver and Conservation Legacy in Durango, both existing AmeriCorps Vista projects, with an additional 100 to 200 Senior Corps volunteers to join in Denver. It's hard to underscore how important this news is. With hundreds of contract tracers working in the state, we will have a much better response to the virus, and we'll be able to address outbreaks more quickly, which will reduce infections, save lives, and allow us to be more open with our interactions, right? So we talked about organized sports, youth and adult. The reason, while you're at, of course, a heightened risk of contracting the virus in a larger group of 25 people playing a sport, especially a contact sport. The effect on others is lessened because we have the ability to do that contact tracing because we know who you played with, who you played against. They can all be contacted and they can all be isolated as necessary. For more information on requirements, visit colorado.gov/servecolorado. Those who serve as Vista Summer Associates earn a stipend and education award at the end of their service. They are working to save lives, to restore our economy to health, and to help us all get back to normal. And I want to thank Gary Community Investments and Mike Johnson for their partnership and for securing the technology and equipment necessary for the virtual service required by the unique circumstances. We're really deploying technology around the contact tracing and isolation in new and exciting ways to save lives and leverage the positive impact of isolating and tracing. And that's the spirit of news we need right now. We need to hear the good news, people coming together, working together to solve our common problems. With your work and partnership, we're going to get through this pandemic, and we will also create a better, more just society. Thank you all, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Governor, this is the first time that you've spoken since the protest began on Thursday. I'm wondering why you waited so long to address the state, and also there's been increasing calls for an investigation into the police use of force in Denver, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, or if you've seen anything that's been particularly troubling.
So while I've issued 2 statements as well as a statement in conjunction with Mayor Hancock last night, I've really been focused on listening mode, and that means hearing from others. Part of leadership is knowing when and how to listen. Over the past few days, I've been listening to members of the faith community, community leaders, members of the Black Caucus, listening to those who have fought these fights for years and have a comprehensive understanding of where we are and where we need to be. I'm excited, of course, to be able to work with people across our entire state for more just Colorado, a Colorado that supports the principles enshrined in our Constitution of equality under law, and that celebrates the diversity of our state and a Colorado for all. What was your second question?
There's been increasing calls from the Denver City Council to investigate police actions in response to the protests, and I'm curious if there's anything that you've seen that's been troubling, or if you're going to be joining those calls as well.
Well, it's my understanding that the Denver Police Department has said they will investigate the tactics that were used during the demonstration. I was very happy to see the Denver Police Chief join arm in arm with the protesters in solidarity. I've heard from many law enforcement officers that they fully support the goals of the movement of the protesters, and were even more offended than many others by the illegal murder of George Floyd because of how poorly it reflected on their profession and the risks that they put themselves in every day to keep us safe. Telephone?
Governor Polis, this is David Clue at Denver 7. Thank you for the opportunity here. Looking for your response to the president's accusations that governors have been weak in their response to the protests like the ones we've seen here in Denver, and that there is a greater need for armed, and I use his words, dominance of our streets. Can you respond to that? I know you did briefly in your statement that you released along with the mayor, but now that we've got you in front of a microphone, can you respond to that?
Yeah, the president's threat to deploy federal troops is counterproductive, would only stoke the potential for worse violence and destruction. And I fear shows that he's become so isolated in the White House, in the ivory tower, that he doesn't understand what's really going on our streets. The amazing acts of goodwill, people that are cleaning up graffiti that are left by those who have deliberately undermined the legacy of George Floyd, the peaceful protests, the promise of an America in which no American should live in fear simply because of the color of their skin. And it's important that we point that out in this time, that part of leadership is feeling and understanding the anguish, the pain that so many Americans feel, Americans who believe that we lived in a better America, one that had overcome many aspects of our legacy of racism stemming from the days of slavery.
Governor, are there any specific proposals or reforms you'd like to see here in Colorado in response to the protests over George Floyd's death?
So I'm looking forward to working to do what we can to promote equal treatment under the law. I think there's a number of ideas that members of the Black Caucus and Latinx Caucus in our state legislature have, other ideas at the municipal level, at the county level. I think that this has been such a powerful moment. Yes, because of what happened to George Floyd and the fact that the perpetrators will be held accountable under law, but also because all of us know in our hearts that this is far more widespread than just what happened to George Floyd. And this provides us a window, an opportunity to address systemic racism in a way that leaves a positive legacy for our children and the future of our nation.
Hello, Governor. This is Vinny Deljude at Bloomberg News in Denver. Another question regarding the White House conference call. How did you and the other governors at the moment receive the president's comments that most state governors are, quote, weak? How did you and the others respond on the call? Thank you, sir.
Well, look, this is a president that, as a pattern, has bombastic tweets and public proclamations. Even those who support his policies often question his careless use of words and rhetoric in offensive and divisive ways. And so it certainly characterizes the way that this president has used words throughout his tenure as president, and of course throughout his life. That's a pattern. I'm focused on practical solutions. Of course, I expressed on the call the concern that protesters might encounter coronavirus, and that could lead to public health setbacks. I talked about how masks were made available for some of the protesters in Colorado and how we're encouraging testing. And I hope that that serves as an example to governors in other states to open up testing and, to the extent they can, masks to help keep those who are exercising their First Amendment rights as safe as possible. ¿Ya? Sí. Despacio, por favor.
Gracias. No tenemos claro si va a utilizar la Guardia Nacional para frenar las protestas.
Aquí en Colorado estamos usando a casi 100 miembros de la Guardia Nacional para proteger a la gente y los edificios y la institución de nuestro gobierno. Las personas que están encontrando a los protestadores son miembros de la policía de Denver y otras ciudades que ayudan a Denver. Hay un usando limitado de la Guardia Nacional.
we're going to be able to get a hold on contact tracing when we're talking about thousands of people, protesting in 2 weeks. I know you said 300 people are starting now, but is that going to be enough to be able to grasp this
Yeah.
and advance this?
And that's one of the real public health issues around these large protests is no, you're not going to be able to do, you can't do meaningful contact tracing other than that. If there's a group of people that went together, and many of them, if you're a group of 3, a group of 5, if you were with those people, they would be notified, they would be contacted. But the reason it's important that protesters get tested a week after joining in the public protests is that then they will know, because it could be people they live with who should be warned, it could be their friends that they're seeing in other scenarios. There's little meaningful contact tracing that can be done in that kind of large gathering. That's why it's of a very different nature than an organized sport or an activity where we know who's doing it. For instance, summer camp, another activity for kids. When there is a kid at a summer camp that has coronavirus, we know who the counselors are, we know who are in their cohort, and it's relatively simple to do that. So it's harder to do around large gatherings, which is why we're doing everything we can to discourage those kinds of very large gatherings. And if people feel they are necessary, and I sympathize with their view that they consider this essential, just as other Coloradans, by the way, felt it was essential to protest different closures of businesses and exercise their First Amendment rights several weeks ago. But if you're going to do that, wear a mask and try to remain 6 feet from others who aren't in your group, and get tested a week later.
Hi, Governor. Dave Perry at Sentinel, Colorado. A federal report yesterday revealed that an astounding number of COVID-19 related deaths in nursing home-like facilities, and it looks like Colorado is no exception to that level of lethal infection. And I know that state and local officials have worked to ensure best practices, but why haven't these facilities, and especially their employees, been afforded the same level of attention and that hospitals and first responders get regarding PPE and expertise, or are there just too many of them?
So we have, I believe, 220 or so registered nursing facilities, but about 1,000 congregate senior living facilities in our state. And we're finally at the point, Dave, where we have enough testing where we're able to do testing of the asymptomatic workers who go into many of these locations. We have 2 partnerships we're doing that testing through. One is our National Guard, and I think they're in, I believe they're in Grand Junction yesterday and today testing on the Western Slope, but they've been moving around senior facility to senior facility. And I've heard from many of my friends that live in these facilities who said, we were glad they were here, we were glad they were tested. The other partnership is with CSU, which is doing 40,000 tests of both asymptomatic workers as well as residents in senior living facilities over the next month, month and a half. The best way to prevent loss is to keep it out of those facilities. That was not a testing capability that we had in Colorado or that anyone had in our country 2 months ago. We were barely, and I say we, I mean we as America, weren't barely, if at all, even able to test people who were symptomatic 2 months ago. Now we're at the point where we can test everybody who's symptomatic with additional targeted testing for people who are asymptomatic. And where do we target that testing? To workers at senior facilities, other vulnerable populations of public facing. We talked about the protesters and the need to get tested. But in general, prioritizing keeping it out of those senior facilities. Every senior facility in our state also has filed an isolation plan. When somebody tests positive, does not require hospitalization, how can they be removed? How can they be isolated in a way that doesn't lead to further contamination of other residents of that facility? Yes.
Thank you, Governor. 2 questions, if you don't mind indulging me for a moment. First is regarding nursing homes. We understand, in speaking with several nursing home and long-term care facility owners, that a lot of these residents are really just frankly getting depressed, being so isolated in their homes, and they're looking for better guidance from the state for residents to at least be able to sit next to one another in dining halls and things like that. Any expected changes in guidance regarding that?
Well, there are many cases where there are small groups of residents that are able to be together, 2 residents visiting. Sitting together in a dining hall with everybody coming in could lead to an additional outbreak, especially in facilities that might have 1 or 2 or 3 positive cases. But certainly there's a lot of one-on-one socializing that's occurring. Of course, many residents are engaging with their loved ones across the country and across the world using technology like FaceTime and Google Google Chat and Zoom. But we know it's difficult. It's difficult for people of all ages. It's difficult for families to support themselves through this. Some have experienced loss of job, some diminished income. It's difficult for the kids who didn't have their last few weeks of school. It's difficult for the high school graduates who got to celebrate in some fashion, but not the way that they would have wanted to or that I would have wanted them to. And yes, it's difficult for folks who live in retirement communities and senior centers who are able to socialize less for these few months, but it's because they'll be able to socialize more if they're healthy and alive. And many of them have many good years ahead, the golden years of another decade, another 2 decades in some cases. It's really important that we don't put that at inordinate risk by trying to socialize too much too soon.
Absolutely. Second question is back to the protest. Last night's protest was a much different scene than I think what we saw over the weekend, a lot less violence happening. Have you been in contact with the parties involved in the protest and or the police to develop better strategies to see this kind of cultural change in the style of the protest?
I think that the organizers and leading voices in the protests have strongly disavowed the actions that a few have taken to undermine the peaceful goal of social justice, of holding the murderers of George Floyd accountable. And I think that those who would seek to usurp the memory of George Floyd and those who feel passionately about a more just society are really feeling excluded and should be and not part of the responsible movement that's occurring. So I think the responsible voices that have organized and participated in the protests have been very clear about the goals of the protest, and I'm glad that hopefully those who are seeking to usurp it for anarchism or whatever their cause is are not being met with a welcome reception by those actually involved with the protests.
Hello, guys.
Go ahead.
You spoke about the use of force by Denver police, and I'd like to ask you about the officers that report to the state and to you. Do you approve of the use of force by the Colorado State Patrol on the Capitol grounds over the weekend? And do you believe that fair notice was given to the people assembled on the Capitol grounds before force was used?
Well, I'll look forward to being updated on the details, but I'm aware of at least one incident where a Colorado State Patrol officer was involved with a 9 News reporter, and the State Patrol sent a statement this morning about what happened, and I encourage you to see that. They mentioned in their statement how much, of course, they value members of the press. They said as soon as they realized it was a member of the media, they apologized. I will make sure that the exact actions are fully accountable to me, that I understand the exact chain of events, hold anybody accountable for their behavior. The Colorado State Patrol in the statement welcomed the ideas in participating in a joint task force to help reduce these kinds of incidences, and our public information officers can assist with developing strategies. I know that the brave members of the media that are covering these events are putting themselves at risk, and it's enough to put themselves at risk, of course, from those who might be seeking to actively undermine the memory of George Floyd and causing violence and damage. But we should absolutely not be putting them at additional risk from those who are there to protect them and protect all of us, and that includes the Colorado State Troopers. Oh, sorry, this one we'll get to in a second. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. Two-parter. First thing, do you have any plans to attend any of the protests for George Floyd? And the second question is, it's great news that we have 800 contract tracers coming. How close does that get the state of Colorado to where it ultimately needs to be to do the job?
Yeah, I think with a few hundred that are starting next week, we need to learn. This is the contact tracers. She asked, how close are we to where we need to be? I think will largely be there. There's really two factors, and one is the number, but the other is the training and deployment. This is all a new world for us. It's a new world across the country. We will learn by example how many cases they can handle and how effectively they can do that, often using virtual technology for the interviews as well as contacting people virtually. But given that we are now at a couple hundred, few hundred new cases a day, we should be able to get the benefit from that contact tracing on most of the identified cases now. And keep in mind that some are easier to contact trace than others. We talked about a few scenarios here today. We talked about somebody who attended the protests, right, and contracts coronavirus. There's not a lot of contact tracing in their capacity at the protests unless they went with the group. But there's still the normal contact. Where do they work? Who do they live with? That side of things. If somebody lives in a senior care facility, again, very limited contact tracing. It's basically who do they live with, who's there. They probably weren't interacting with a lot of other members of the community. Member of an organized sports team, who do they play with, who do they play against, as well as where they work and who they live with. So that's the kind of work they're going to be doing. I'll be better able to answer your question after they're up and going, and I'll be happy to let you know whether it's enough or whether we still need more. What?
Would you plan on attending any of the protests?
You know, I thought about that long and hard. I have done my best to model the kind of behavior in a public health crisis that will prevent loss of life and spread of the virus. I wear a mask in public when I'm walking my dog, when I'm out with my kids. I completely respect those who consider it essential and necessary to be there. I think the necessary and essential role of a governor is to listen. And I've spent a lot of time this weekend hearing from members of the faith community, attending church virtually, members of the Black Caucus, Latino Caucus, the mayor of Denver, many others. And I think that essential role as a listener is one that I generally do in a safe way virtually, telephone, Zoom chats, and virtual chats. And that's the most critical role of a governor, to make sure that they're hearing from all the folks who are putting themselves at risk because of a just cause. Telephone?
Governor Polis, this is Caitlin Kim from Colorado Public Radio. Thank you. I have two questions, if you'll indulge me. The first is, in your opinion, in the state's opinion, does President Trump have the authority to deploy troops to Colorado to deal with protests if he feels the state isn't doing a good job with that? And then the second question is a follow-up from some earlier questions. I just wanted to know if you can give me concrete examples of, or examples of what you can do, of the concrete action that you can take to deal with systemic inequality, systemic racism. Thank you.
So on the first one, this is all new. It was proposed by the president yesterday. I don't have any legal analysis about the president's ability to do that. What I have is a policy analysis that would be a very bad thing to try to do or to do if he legally had the right to do it. So the president, to be clear, should not deploy the U.S. military to the streets to fire on our fellow Americans. That would be more divisive and worsen the situation while dishonoring the memory of George Floyd, as well as the millions that it has moved to action on social justice. There's a lot that we need to do to end the long shadow of racism and the systemic racial inequities in our society. It's something that I campaigned on, and it's something that I've worked on as governor from day one, whether it's establishing a chief equity officer at Department of Higher Education to address equity gaps, whether it's my lifelong focus on the achievement gap in education, the pathway to opportunity, whether it's the criminal justice reforms that we've passed in the last legislative session. And I look forward to continuing to work with legislators of both parties to make sure that we avoid the racially disparate impact of our legal system. So there's a long way to go from here to there. We've certainly taken a number of steps, and I'm really pleased that this will be an impetus to do even more quicker to address systemic racism in our nation and in our state.
Two more questions?
Okay, from the room, yes.
Yeah, I'm hoping I can get you to be a little bit more specific. You said you've been in listening mode recently. And
certainly a lot of people protesting in Colorado are protesting injustices they've seen in the state. What problems or injustices have you seen or heard of specifically in Colorado, and what can be done about it?
Well, as I said, I mean, certainly what's catalyzed the protests is the killing of George Floyd. But what makes it resonate is that it's a lot more than just the killing of George Floyd. It's our knowledge that it's an example of what has occurred for decades in our nation, targeting, racial targeting, disparate enforcement mechanisms, a fair investigation of officer-involved shootings, the sentencing reform that looks at the racial impact of different crimes. So there's a long list. I think these were known issues before George Floyd, and they're known issues after George Floyd. But the reason that George Floyd's murder has resonated with so many is it provide a very visual and guttural example of the racial inequities in our society as a nation. We'll do one more telephone and then one more in person. Telephone?
Thank you, Governor. Charles Ashby from the Grand Junction Daily Sentinel. So we're starting to see some progress on some bills that you talked about related to the COVID and then what it did to the economy getting through the legislature, such as the Rural Jumpstart and the telemedicine. But today the Democrats and Republicans revealed a bill that they're going to try to repeal the Gallagher Amendment. I wanted to get your thoughts on that idea, and I was wondering, what else do you think the legislature should be addressing beyond the budget that they're doing right now that you want to see get done before they're all said and done?
I'm supportive of the bipartisan work around Gallagher reform. It imposes a one-size-fits-all formula that's based on the big cities on the entire state, and it's led to tax increases on small businesses. It's led to lack of tax relief for Colorado families and homeowners, and it's been fairly random on who it affects where and in what way. So I'm all for, of course, making sure we protect people against unfair increases in their property taxes, but Gallagher doesn't hit that mark. It sometimes does in some areas, it sometimes doesn't in others. We need a more thoughtful way to do that takes into account the regional differences in our state. And I'm looking forward to continuing to work with Democrats and Republicans to have a budget that funds our priorities in education, in healthcare, in rural economic development with the limited resources that we have.
Governor, the casinos up in Gilpin County are really wondering when they can get back open again. I'm wondering if there's any progress made on your front or CPH's front on that, if you have any thoughts about when they may be able to offer.
So the average, we could look up the exact, but the average turnaround on variance requests is about 1 week. And so we generally keep to that. I think there's been some that have been approved in 3 or 4 days. Some that are more complicated take 7 or 8 days. But we'll get you an answer on that specifically. I think there's 2, Teller and Gilpin, that are pending in that area. The work at CDPHE is they're turning around those variance requests as quickly as they can. There's well over 16 of them already in place, including for Denver, for Botanical Garden. And we're looking forward to working with Teller and Gilpin counties to safely reopen the casinos as soon as possible. Okay, thank you all.
All right, there you have it. For the first time, we heard from Governor Polis, at least through a press conference since the protests began around Denver, on the killing of George Floyd. He said this is not an isolated incident, that this is a pattern. He added that he agreed with the message of the protest. He also added that the protest could result in hundreds of more COVID-19 cases and is urging people who were at that protest to get free tests at testing sites around the state of Colorado. We're at now more than 26,000 COVID-19 cases around Colorado, with 1,400 deaths of people who had the virus. He also talked about big news today, new public health orders, with the final versions coming out on Thursday, which will open up playgrounds and pools this weekend. That's good news for parents with kids. 10 people or less on playgrounds, but he also urged people to check with their local communities and their local governments and city and town governments about those rules and on how they're going to handle that locally. He also talked about the ability to participate in group sports, organized sports activities. That's a big deal. And then he also talked about the 18,000 tests we are up to per day here in Colorado. And big news, he said, here with 800 people from AmeriCorps and Senior Corps groups that will be doing contact tracing. He said that's very important to combine that with the testing going on in Colorado. A big interesting question that came from one of the reporters, one of the first ones that came out during that press conference, was he was asked, why did it take so long to have a press conference as we've been seeing these protests erupt around the city? He said he's really been focusing on listening mode with community members. We'll have a full breakdown of what the governor said today on 9news.com very shortly. And of course, I'll see you back here on 9 News at 4 p.m. Thanks for joining us.